Hi, good morning, and welcome everyone to the CAAM Filmmaker Summit Work From Home Edition. I'm SAKYA. I'm the Talent Development and Special Projects Manager here at CAAM. First of all, I'd like to thank our funder. Thank you so much to the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation for supporting CAAM, especially supporting the Filmmaker Summit. The summit is a space where CAAM convenes our community, our makers, our fellowship cohort, and our partners to connect with each other and to ask the hard questions that affect our work, the work of making films, of collaboration, and of sustaining our livelihoods. Before we go into our first session, we have a few words from SUSANNAH ROBBINS of the San Francisco Film Commission, a sponsor for this session. SUSANNAH?
Much. I am really happy to be here today. I'm the executive director of the San Francisco Film Commission, and we are part of the mayor's office. We permit productions which happen on public property in San Francisco. And we've worked with filmmakers from CAAM before. HP Mendoza used a program that we have called the Scene in San Francisco rebate program for his film Bitter Melon. And basically, this program is an incentive for filmmakers where we offer up to $600,000 per film. And basically, the way it works is that if your budget is under $3 million, you need to shoot 55% of your shoot days in San Francisco. And if it's over 3 million, you have to shoot 65% of your shoot days in the city. And with that, we will rebate up to $600,000 per film. And that basically is a rebate of any fees you pay to any city agency while you're filming. So that could be our permit fees. It could be up to 4 police officers per day for a 12-hour day. It could be fees with rec and park if you're going to be filming in the parks, or if you need to do a street closure, or renting any muni buses or charters, or even any city personnel that have to come out and maybe take down banners that are going to be in your shot. All those things are covered. Basically, any check that you cut to any city agency is rebated up to $600,000 per film. We also rebate the cost of production office space if it's in a city-owned property. So you can work with us and we can help you find something like that. But we're really excited to be able to offer this to productions because we really want to have more filming in the city, especially once the shelter in place ends and we can work with you on helping make your films happen. There is no minimum budget in order to participate in the program. And we do rebate 100% of those city agency costs. If you want to know more about this, you can go to our website, which is filmsf.org, and there's an incentives information drop down on there. And we just really hope to work with you. So hopefully when we come out of this shelter in place COVID-19 spot that we're in, we'll be able to meet with you and talk with you more about how we can help you with your production. Thank you.
Thank you so much, SUSANNAH. I'd also like to thank our co-presenters for this panel. Thank you so much for getting the word out. Thank you to ADOC, to Frameline, and to BAVAC. And now, without further ado, we're going into our Filmmaking in the Time of COVID-19 panel. We wanted to start off our summit with this session because I think this is an opportunity for us to ground all of us in this moment, which is a very unusual moment indeed, and to talk about the experience that we're going through as filmmakers, as curators, and as distributors. So it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this panel, Emily Hong. Emily is a 2019 CAAM Fellow. She's also a filmmaker, a podcast host, an ADOC core member, and if that wasn't enough, she's also an assistant professor of anthropology and visual studies. Emily, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, Sapna. I'm really excited to be here. And I'm going to kick us off with an introduction to our panel topic, and then I'll introduce our panelists for today. The experiences of filmmakers during this pandemic has not been a single story. There are those of us used to jumping on a plane every week to a new location or film festival who are now struggling to leave the house for a daily walk. And those among us with little choice but to put film careers on hold to homeschool young kids. And there are some of us who worry about our aging or sick grandparents and parents, or perhaps our own immune compromised selves. Those of us who worry about being targeted in the grocery store or on the street for walking while Asian. And there are those who continue to worry about whether they'll come back home after jogging while Black. Many of us are struggling with exacerbated mental health issues while also trying to be creative, let alone productive. And some of us are figuring out how to apply for unemployment, SBA, PPPs, EIDL, and all these new bureaucratic acronyms that are now somehow central to our lives. And there are those of us who are freelancers wondering, after months of quarantining, how long can I keep refusing gigs before people stop calling altogether? This pandemic has touched all of our lives in the independent filmmaking community, but it has not done so evenly. As indie filmmakers and gig workers, we're used to having curveballs thrown at us, working long hours to find creative workarounds and stretching a shoestring budget. In some ways, we were ready for this moment. And in other ways, there's so much that we need to do to rethink and remake business as usual. I'm very excited for this panel, which I think will get at some of these big existential questions that many of us are grappling with, and also some of the nitty-gritty practical how-tos that filmmakers are thinking through in these pandemic times. So I want to introduce our panelists for today. It's quite the panel of rock stars. And so our first panelist, Chang, is a multi-award-winning director of Up the Yangtze, China Heavyweight, The Fruit Hunters, and Gatekeeper. His first feature script, Eggplant, was part of the 2018 TIFF Writers Studio and the 2015 Sundance Institute Screening and Directing Labs. His latest feature documentary, This Is Not a Movie, about Robert Fisk, the controversial Middle East correspondent, had its world premiere at the Toronto International Film Festival in 2019. Chang is a member of the Directors Guild of Canada and the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Our next panelist, Chen, is a freelance cinematographer, photographer, and editor based in Oakland, California. I see there's a lot of Bay Area folks here today. He has 2 decades of location production experience spanning documentary, scripted, and commercial projects. He's contributed camera work to numerous films, including 9 Man, Yes, We're Open, and Advantageous. He's currently working on Home as a Hotel, a documentary about residents of single-room occupancy hotels in San Francisco. Next up, we have Ramona Diaz, an award-winning Asian American filmmaker whose films have screened at Sundance, the Berlinale, Tribeca, the Biennale, IDFA, and many other top-tier film festivals. All of Ramona's feature-length films, Imelda, The Learning, Don't Stop Believing, and Motherland have been broadcast on PBS. Ramona was awarded a prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship and is a recipient of a United States Artist Fellowship. Ramona is a graduate of Emerson College and holds an MA from Stanford. Our next panelist is Masashi Niwano, the Festival and Exhibition Director at the Center for Asian American Media. Originally from the Bay Area, he holds bachelor's degrees in film production from San Francisco State University. Prior to rejoining CAAM as Festival and Exhibition Director, Masashi was the Executive Director for the Austin Asian American Film Festival. And last but not least, we have Teng, the producer of the Academy Award-nominated short documentary, St. Louis Superman. She's the senior commissioning producer overseeing the Americas for Witness, Al Jazeera's English flagship observational documentary strand. Her other commission, Dead Women's Past, recently won Best Short Documentary at the London International Documentary Film Festival, qualifying it for the BAFTA. She's also an Emmy-nominated director and a former journalist for the New York Times. So please join me in welcoming all of our panelists. And I also want to thank our viewers. To everyone, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having us.
So to kick things off, I want to start off on a bit of a personal note. And I'd like for each of our panelists to start by briefly talking about how this pandemic has shifted our daily lives. And to give you a minute or two just to think about that question, I'm gonna start by sharing my own example. I think one thing that has really shifted in my daily life is that I'm giving a lot more tech support to my parents than usual. I feel like it's something I've always had to do, but my parents who are in their 60s, they need more than before. And especially my mom, who's a painter, one of her paintings is behind me. She is now teaching, trying to teach online. And so I'm helping her with that, but also, you know, for the first time, I've been helping her apply for unemployment. So negotiating the website of the New York State Department of Labor, like that's a whole other degree in figuring out how to use different browsers and things like that to get through. So that's sort of been my daily reality recently. So to the rest of the panelists, the question is, so what is that one thing or one of many things that has changed in your daily life, or perhaps one big thing that maybe you had planned that's now definitely not happening as a result of this pandemic? And I will start with Jung.
Well, thank you all. Yeah, it's been a crazy time, and I think it's just been sort of like a domino effect. Just before things shut down in late March, I was in Los Angeles and just had a screening of my film, This Is Not a Movie, and came home to the eventual lockdown. So essentially what happened was the release of my film, festivals, and theatrical release was postponed or halted, which threw me into this tumbling, like, you know, this void of what next. Then negotiating this, it's like almost like 5 stages of you know, the grief thing. Like, and then I'm stuck in my house, and I've got a toddler, and I have a freelance partner who's also, you know, an artist, and we're trying to figure out what to do. We don't know. And slowly things started to, you know, once that there was a 2-week period of sort of feeling like I was in forced retirement, and then eventually, you know, things picked up, and made a little short film with the Thessaloniki Film Festival, and then jumped into this production of a short film about frontline workers in America, which I'll talk more about later.
Thank you so much. Next up, Seng.
Yeah, so you know, when the last time I was on set was in March, and it's funny because in certain ways, it's a dry spell. We've had lots of dry spells in in all of our careers, but it's like the first things I always do is like, how much savings do I have? How long can I not work at all? You know, if I never get called back on set. So in some ways that was a relief because fortunately we had enough savings, we weren't stressed out, and you know, had to go through all the paperwork. But yeah, it's a little weird because it's like we don't, you know, as crew people, I have no idea when I'll be back working in that capacity. But at the same time, in a normal dry spell, I'm sort of questioning myself all the time. Like, did I offend somebody? Does my work suck now? Like, I don't know what's going on. So mentally, it's almost easier for me to not have to worry about that. So yeah, and socially, like one of the tough parts is I was sort of got to this nice place and sort of work-life balance where I was playing music about 2 or 3 times a week with other people. And now it's just like, you know, it's like back in high school where I'm just sitting in the basement by myself playing along with songs that I like. So it's a little bit of adjustment, adjusting to being in a 1-bedroom apartment with my partner who used to work basically full-time, and I have an office and we're sort of together. So that's always, you know, I'm sure a lot of people going through that where it's just, you know, we're around each other a lot more. So it, you know, we work out a lot of things together. It's been trying, but you know, getting through it.
Thank you, Seng. How about you, Ramona?
Oh gosh. So the big difference in my life is that I'm on terra firma, right? I'm on solid ground. And I just realized this is the longest I've been home for maybe 3-4 years, right? I've been constantly on the road, either shooting or in the circuit, in the film festival circuit. And I miss that. I actually miss being on planes and being at the airport. I just miss the travel and the people. I'm missing people now. So where did the lockdown? Okay, so when all this happened, I just premiered my latest film, 1,000 Cuts, at Sundance in January. Basically, really, we didn't know then how lucky that was, because shortly thereafter, of course, Berlin still happened, but then South by got canceled, and then everything else fell like dominoes, right? So the week that the world turned, I call it the week the world turned, I was actually in Manila because I was showing the film to the participants in the movie. It was a sneak preview for them. And the plan was to go to South by, right, from Manila to Austin. And of course, on the way to Manila over the Pacific, I was asleep, I woke up, I checked my phone, and South by was canceled, right? So I knew then it was totally over. I knew everything else would be canceled because everyone was looking to South by to see what would happen. And so that was it. It was like, okay, the reckoning, what do? You have a film and you have to roll it out. What happens now? So luckily, we still got a distributor, so we're now reimagining what the distribution landscape will look like for this film, which I can talk about, later on. But that's basically the main difference. It's a roller coaster ride. Some days I'm really enthusiastic and positive. Some days I'm not so much. It's hard to be creative some days. Like, people tell me it's a time to write that script. I'm like, really? That's really tough. That's really tough to be creative, Yeah.
Thank you so much. And how about you, Masashi?
Well, first off, hi, everybody. As someone who's been working on this festival, I'm just really happy to see people coming together. This is very exciting. Myself and the camp staff have been working very hard to make this happen. On a personal note, I think my cat keeps staring at me, doesn't know why I'm still in this apartment every day. He's continuously confused by my presence. I would say, as far as the COVID-19 pandemic, it was really interesting for myself and everyone at CAAM. We were going right into our press conference for our CAAMFest in May, and I am so happy that we are doing this virtual festival, but there were many, many weeks where we went through every emotion, from disappointment to confusion to loss to sadness. And as we were moving away from that initial shock, we realized the filmmaking community was still looking for answers. They were looking for opportunities to still continue to play their films. At the point of the pandemic, we already solidified our program. So we knew all these amazing films that were wanting to get to the audiences. On the other side, we saw our communities looking for ways to connect. We saw so much isolation and a need for an actual festival. So, the CAAM team has been working so much the last few weeks on creating something that could replicate that in-person experience. So the summit, so happy this is happening. We have film screenings and other components. And for me, it was a learning curve. I have grown up with the kind of classic of film festivals in a theater, and trying to now go online. It's a different way of exhibition. It's been really kind of great to learn it. But it's definitely been a hurdle here and there, and I'm just happy we're here.
Thanks, Masashi. And Po, how about you?
Hi. So, up until February, it was really hectic and really busy because we were running a full Oscar campaign. So I was so tired after, and then decided to go for a 10-day silent, no talking meditation retreat. And then got out of it, and coronavirus had hit. So finally came to the US. And so it was really good to sort of transition into no talking and meditating for 10 days into the current pandemic. And it's been nonstop with work and, at Witness at Al Jazeera. We still have projects underway, commissioning, acquiring, co-producing. None of it has stopped. And we're committed to supporting all the independent filmmakers in as many ways as possible. And a lot of times it's just really taking the time to listen and to assure people that funds are still coming, to talk about their day. But yeah, if there's anything that I learned from the 10-day silent meditation retreat, which I'm carrying it on into my work and life, is what has happened in the past. You can think about that. What is gonna come has not yet come. So just focus on the present, and that will give you so much clarity. And yeah, and I try to work on that at work and life. And I think it helps.
Thank you, Po, for those words of wisdom, and everyone for giving a window into your daily life for our viewers and listeners at home, who I'm sure can relate to a lot of what you all shared. So for my next question, I want to jump right into the ethics of whether and how to film in this current crisis. And, we live in, many of us who live in the US, I think we're used to a very individualistic way of thinking, but somehow this pandemic has really further reminded us of our interconnectedness, and even especially the filmmaking industry that often emphasizes this kind of creative genius of an individual director. We all know how many people it takes to make a film. So those things are starting to matter even more right now. So I want to start with two of our panelists who are involved with film production at this very time, when filmmaking is even more ethically fraught than usual. So to Ramona and Po, in that order actually, can you tell us about the projects that you're involved with right now and how you're grappling with some of these tough ethical questions about whether and how to film during this pandemic?
So the film that we're in development in now, it's a mix of development, production, and raising money, right? So I'm not sure even what that stage is, but it's happening all at the same time because, it's a fast-moving train. It is a collective voice of the global documentary filmmakers everywhere. Basically, we've reached out to seasoned filmmakers, documentary filmmakers globally, to film what's right in front of them. What is happening right in front of in their lockdown situation or not in their lockdown situation, because you hear everyone say this is a shared experience, everyone is experiencing this, but it is, I think, asymmetrically shared. It's not a common sharing. We experience it differently. So I'm in partnership with Janet Gargi, who used to work for Vulcan, and Thomas Lennon. We've reached out to filmmakers who have, what we found out is, well, first of all, we were very clear and we said, we don't expect you to leave your spaces, right? Unless you're allowed to, because say, we're talking to a filmmaker in Taipei, he can leave his space, or our filmmaker in Manila can leave her space because she has a badge. So we were really clear that they shouldn't get into any kind of situation, that is risky. So our first conversations with them have always been, what are you seeing? Where are you at? So we met them where they were at, right? And figured out if their stories fit this sort of omnibus film we're trying to put together. Because they are 19 filmmakers, and 19 is like a shameless marketing tool. It may not necessarily, I don't think we'll end up with 19 filmmakers, but it's COVID-19 and 19. So, but probably yes, 19 filmmakers, but not equally. And then we're going to interweave this into one film, one collective voice. And so that's, and a lot of filmmakers that we've we started speaking to had already been thinking, because we're documentary filmmakers, right? This is what we do. We try to bear witness to the moment, but a lot of them were overwhelmed. How do you do that when this is so big? So it was like reaching out to them and telling them, no, you can. Tell me what's happening around you. It can be short. It's like an 8-minute film, right? If you do the numbers, like a 90-minute film, 19 films, it's really like 6 or 7 minutes. So it just enabled them to then start shooting what they were seeing around them. or some of them had already started because they had equipment and they wanted to do something. So we came in the middle of that and they were so excited. So that's what we're trying to do. It's a very interesting thing to try to fundraise for this kind of film because we are in a very crowded market. There are like 20 plus COVID-19 films being pitched right now. And you know all of them. You know where all of them are going. It's a very interesting dance, actually, that we're doing. But we are also reaching out to other filmmakers who we know have sort of had the same idea, but we're further, I think we were further in development than they were. So now we're collaborating. I think collaborating is the key, right? Collaboration, because I think we'll get it done. It's a very interesting film because it isn't the frontliners. It's really, and it's not the restaurant failing in New York, right? It is really individual voices, a global experience, but very different. So yeah, so we're always asked, why would people want to tune into a COVID-19 film, right? When we're at the other side of this. I think two things. One is to validate their experience because it is a little bit the same, right? There's things in the film that they will recognize as their own, but also to see how other people lived it. Because we have a young filmmaker in Beirut who's filming her grandfather during Ramadan, right? Her grandfather was a conspiracy theorist, and he doesn't believe in COVID. And it's really interesting, but they have a very intergenerational kind of conversation and relationship. So it's yes, it's dire. It's a dire story, but there's also moments of levity in it, if I can say that. So it's a mix. So that's what we're doing. And it's really filmmakers who can film themselves and are comfortable. So, and it also depends. Some of them are just inside, some of them are outside. We're also really, really concerned about not navel gazing, right? It can't be all filmmakers locked down in their, like, whatever, in their apartments, because that's not really the full experience.
Yeah, I think
we're well aware of that. Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things we'll talk about is what are the creative strategies we can use so that it isn't that navel gazing.
Yeah, there is a danger, and we're very aware to not navel gaze. So that's what I'm doing.
Thanks,
and it's been very inspiring, actually, to talk to all the filmmakers. It's therapy for everyone.
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing that when it comes out. Po, how about you? Do you relate to some of those experiences? What are the questions you're thinking through right now?
I think in terms of docs, making new docs right now, COVID as an element, but not the focus of the story, because ultimately, if an entity like Witness or Jazeera, if it's going to invest in a film and support a filmmaker all the way, the story has to last for a long time, right? It has to still be relevant years to come. And so we're looking at stories where COVID is an element. It is not just the focus. So it's not going to be, just the frontline workers and this is the moment. It's not a snapshot of a moment because there's so much of it out there. And back to your question about ethics, I think it's really important to think about moving forward with projects, ethics and legality, what's legal and what's ethical, because these are two different things. And I think a lot of times filmmakers and also decision makers, they tend to mix the two and they're very separate. So if you think of it in that framework, then you think about a whole host of other things. So you think about films where you have to make sure that legally you're on solid ground, and ethically, which is always in the gray, that you're also sort of working your way through all these ethical gray questions. So, if you're filming right now, there's a risk. There's a risk. There's always going to be a risk. And so going into any kind of commissioning any film, knowing that there will be a risk to your filmmaker is very important. It's serious risk, a threat to life, endangering also the subject and other people and spreading COVID. So in thinking of it that way, then you selectively choose what kind of risks that may be worth taking and may not be worth taking. So for films, for our commissioned films that were already in production before COVID had hit the Americas, especially in the United States, a lot of them are on hold. We're looking at it on a case-by-case basis. If it's not related to COVID, then it can hold because the subjects are not doing anything, It's got nothing to do with COVID anyway. But for projects where, it does touch on COVID, like the newer projects, then we really have to think through everything, the legal aspects of it, making sure the filmmaker adheres to the country's laws, state laws, regional laws, any kind of laws, legal things in place. And then on the ethical side, making sure that they get the amount of support that they need in regards to, it could be anything. Different filmmakers face different challenges. One filmmaker that I've been working very closely out of Europe, which the film is COVID related, heavily COVID related. It was very difficult for her to get PPE, in the country that she was in. The government and the army and other enforcement personnel had amassed all the PPE. So even though we wanted to shoot, say at this time, it's okay, we can wait. It's the right thing to do to wait. We'll wait 3 weeks until the PPE arrives from China. This was a special case, like she couldn't get the PPE. So, as a commissioner, you have to, for this case, for this story, and this filmmaker specifically had to try and help her source PPE by connecting her to my Chinese contacts, my Chinese friends. Like, okay, how do we do the supply chain thing? But it was special to, this filmmaker. So it's the right thing to do, So that's, especially if you're going into it knowing that there is a risk, especially if somebody is going to be exposed to high viral load, then you have to do as much as you can. But it varies. The ethics, everything varies from case to case, country to country, and story to story. But I will say it's not one size fits all, and that's part of the challenge. But as long as you talk through it together and don't rush into anything, I think it's safer for everybody.
Can I just add one thing? Because I just want to talk really quickly, because what you said was really resonated.
Mm-hmm.
Because the film we're doing, we're staying away from reportage, right? We are really, because it's in a way, yes, it is COVID, but it is the context, and it will to last, right? For the film to be evergreen, so it matters in 20 years. It has almost to transcend the virus. So at the end of the day, it is about the bigger things of family and community. Who are you at this time, right? What happens to you? How do you react? So it's those bigger themes it touches on. So in a way, I mean, of course, it's hard to not deal with COVID. It's so tough, right? Even if especially with ongoing productions. But that's still the hope, right? That it be evergreen, that it will matter in 20 years. So that's why we're staying away from reportage.
Makes sense. Thanks, Ramona. All right, so related to that question, I want to move to two of our other panelists, Yung and Seng, and really get into this practical question of how we can create compelling material at a distance. And this is something that we have been thinking through. I've been a part of the Asian American Documentary Network, ADOC, curation team for this series of micro docs of Asian American experiences during the pandemic. And we always, the second we commission something, we're saying, we're not telling you to go out there. There are ways to do this, and we just have to be a little bit more creative about it. For example, I had one of my students in a class that I teach tape her cell phone to a ceiling fan and actually do one shot where, to kind of give a sense of how her life was thrown out of whack. So things like that. So let's start with Yung, and I'd like to ask, what are some of the strategies that you're experimenting with in this moment to create compelling material at a distance?
Well, I'll speak on the two projects. One that I just completed, which is, I think there's a link in the chat window about a short film that I made. One thing that's come out of this experience is that I live with my partner, who is also an artist, and we have a child together, and as a result, having to be at home all the time, we're sort of forced, but in the end, quite graciously, actually, to work together and come up with ideas together. And so One thing is that short film that I made for Thessaloniki Film Festival, which is completely a fiction film shot on a smartphone with limited resources. You know, I did everything to make it, and my partner was the performer. She's a puppeteer by you know, her expertise is in Chinese shadow puppetry, so we integrated some of that performance into the piece, and it was, you know, it's pretty janky, lo-fi film, but I'm happy with the results, and I hope you do get a chance to watch it. The other thing is something that came out of this, you know, being together and thinking outside of, you know, how to work outside the box, in the box, was this story that came across through my partner's friend, who is a anesthesiologist in Minneapolis, and so it's a story about frontline workers. But we were feeling that, you know, we didn't want to tell a story, you know, a reportage story. It was not a news piece, you know, not something that that would, you know, that you can click on the New York Times website and see immediately. I mean, the story we are working on is, I would say, is a character study, and what we're interested in is these sort of character-driven stories that can be emotional, thoughtful, cinematic, you know, in a way. And one of the techniques for this film, we're tentatively titling it Pandemic 19, which is an ode to Ramona's 19, but this is Pandemic 19. We're going to focus on three specific frontline doctors throughout the U.S. We felt like my pitch was that it's a story that sort of like what I noticed in a photo essay that was published in a few years ago, just before the American invasion of Iraq, where you had these before and after images of young soldiers going to war. And I imagine, and what we've been doing is we've been following these doctors early pre-pandemic. You know, I'm talking about, as you know, probably end of February, beginning of March, and we're following this arc, and we're continuing the story through till who knows when, hopefully by mid-July. But what we're asking the doctors to do is to give us these video diaries that they're recording with their own smartphones and sending to us. And what we're getting is these sort of linear, detailed, very emotional confessions of doctors who not only just talk about their, you know, immediate experiences, but go deeper into that and are starting to question and philosophize about their situations. I find it quite moving, and I think so. The story is built around these narratives from these video confessions, and then in between, we're building this very quiet sort of interstitial. You know, I'd say I call them interstitials, but they're essentially, you know, what we've done is, and with much consideration, we've sent out a cinematographer from New York to our location in Boston to film B-roll. What we're calling exquisite B-roll with in and around Boston, and we've set up a bunch of rules and, you know, protocol to make sure that he's following these steps, and essentially building this short film out of it. And I have to thank CAAM. Actually, CAAM came in to help us with some grant support. We're very grateful for that.
Thanks, Young. So I'm actually being told that we're about halfway through our panel somehow already. So I'm just going to remind the panelists to try to stick to 3 minutes max, or 2 minutes to the responses, so we can get to hear from everyone. So Seng, let's move to you to answer the same question about the creative strategies that you're using to make compelling films at a distance.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I just want to cover really quickly, is the technical thing, which probably people notice is the camera that I'm using is hooked up to a DSLR. So I've actually hooked up a DSLR with a nice lens and all this other stuff. I'm going to take a second real quick. I'm going to switch to another camera. So I've actually sort of run down the quick rundown of my gear. So the video might go black for just a couple seconds, but just bear with me. I'm going to switch right now. Okay, so I think we're back. So anyway, we're I'm just holding this up, this whiteboard, because now you can kind of see my camera and my shotgun mic and all this. And this is basically straightforward interview setup. I mean, I'm actually wearing a mic on my lanyard, not just for the spirit of being at the festival again, but so you can see basically I have a rig that I built with the laptop kind of all set up. And I think this is something that, aside from maybe being able to do it sort of remotely, I think we'll also, as we go forward, maybe decrease sort of how much travel time and that sort of stuff, or how many people we need to have on set. Just since we're in the wide shot, I'm going to just show this. I mean, this is like the device, which is unfortunately it's like doubled or tripled in price now on eBay because everybody went and bought one. Fortunately, I bought one before because I had some clients asking me about some webcasting stuff. I've got like a $10 switcher, which basically hands off the entire signal from the camera I'm looking at over here to the camera that's here. So I'm going to switch back to, because I think we've run down the setup. I wrote it up on a blog post. I think there'll be a link in there somewhere if you want more details. So I'm going to switch back. We're going to have a couple seconds of blank. Okay, so yeah, so one thing I was I warn with this all the time is, like, I know some production companies have been looking at this. Some of the local production companies that I've worked with or know people who work with, and it's kind of looking at this as, oh, we just ship this to our subject. They'll set the whole thing up. It'll be like, no problem. We don't need to, or we'll try to get it to a camera assistant instead of hiring, a DP or a camera operator. And so, I sort of have to be like, it doesn't replace a DP or a person. So obviously the ethics and the issues of putting a crew person in presence of potentially of a subject is sort of always sort of in play, but also I think one thing we have to think about as filmmakers is the longevity of our communities, and how that if we basically try to take these opportunities to be like, oh, we'll save money here because we don't need to send people. If it's driven just by saving money, that's not going to make our communities stronger and sustainable. So that's one thing I just want to warn, that, like, obviously I have my own interest as a DP to be like, you still need a camera person there. You still need someone to know where to point the camera, but also to think about all these decisions of how does this keep our community sustained? Like, how do we continue to try to, have people working, be able to practice our craft, because I feel like even I bought this camera that I was using for the other one just before the new year. And because all my shoots went away, I sort of feel like, well, I haven't really been practicing it. I went to kind of segue into the next section. I actually went and used it on a shoot, and I realized, I hadn't gotten used to where all the buttons were, so especially when we're, in sort of a hot zone, we realize that if we don't have the practice, if we don't keep other people, our crew members, like, able to focus on this, if we're having to take other jobs, the skill of everything is going to go down, not just because we're, having to wear PPE. So getting into the shoot with Home as a Hotel, one thing we did recently was had an interview with one of our subjects, partially to, keep the subject safe, because we can't it's about SROs. So for people who aren't familiar, a lot of these SROs tend to be, they're single rooms. So
Seng, I have to give you 30 seconds to make this point.
Right. So the point was, like, we decided with the director, we're going to be kind of our own germ pod. We took the risk. We said, we're going to get some nice B-roll. We're not going to meet with the subject, but we're just, we're going to try to create some story there. And then that story, actually, we were able to use a lot of the footage we had, hopefully from our relationship before, to make something that's maybe small and topical. But, also ultimately, maybe we're not exactly sure how it'll fit into the larger film, because, like, as people have said, we don't want it to be just a COVID film, but really, how is this affecting the person that we've, are following in the main story?
Thanks, Seng. I could tell a lot of people appreciate not only your setup, but also what you said about how important it is to think about the longevity of our community. So I can tell those two things really blew up in the chat just now. So I want to move to an important question that is on a lot of filmmakers' minds right now, especially folks in post-production, many of whom are thinking about, what do I do right now? Do I have a streaming premiere? do I hold on to my film and hope that there's going to be a vaccine sometime soon and things, will open up again? So I want to hear from two perspectives here, both the festival perspective and hopefully if we have time, a director's perspective also. But I'm going to start with Masashi and really ask this question of what advice do you have for filmmakers who are thinking through how to roll out a film in these times? What are some of these emerging models that we can think through?
I think it's interesting times. I mean, I think it is in some ways the Wild West as far as distribution. I mean, I think distribution in general is a hard thing for filmmakers, independent filmmakers to navigate. And right now it's making it much harder without certain systems like film festivals and other supporters really creating platforms for people to share their works. I have seen a lot of really exciting things, and Ramona mentioned being inspired by filmmakers, and I myself have been inspired to see filmmakers really creating grassroots online spaces to fund their films, to display their films. For me, I would say as a filmmaker, your goal is to find your audiences and do that as many ways as you can. Obviously through great organizations like ADOC and others, there's ways to kind of think it through thoughtfully. But if there are festivals that are happening, let's say in the fall, I would check in with them and just see what their thoughts are on online streaming. Myself, as far as CAAM goes, our goal is to have an in-person or another festival virtual potentially in the fall. So check in with that festival, make sure it's okay with them. There was a pledge online with film festivals pledging that online screenings and other ways of kind of activating audiences is okay for us, at least for this next year or 2 years. So for my end, I would say see what other filmmakers are doing, see what might work for your own program, and then check in with film festivals or other supporters. They may have ideas as well. Yeah.
Thank you, Masashi. Okay, so I'd like to put this to Ramona for 2-minute response to tell us a little bit about 1,000 Cuts and how are you reimagining rolling out that film at this time?
So 1,000 Cuts, again, we were lucky to premiere at Sundance, right? So the premiere was out of the way. But of course, and then we picked up a distributor. We haven't announced yet, so I'm just gonna keep that anonymous for now, a nameless distributor. But part of the deal with this distributor was to do an awards campaign, right? So we really needed to wait to see what the Academy did. And they've now announced, they've tweaked the qualifications for next year, which really allows you to do streaming before theatrical, just as long as you show intent to do theatrical. What does intention mean? You have to show them whatever, like a distribution deal that was really, that clearly states that it was gonna go theatrical. But because theaters are closed, right, you can now accept film festivals that are going online. So that's why with 1,000 Cuts, we did Sundance, but we didn't know what to do after that. So we passed up on a lot of online offerings for subsequent festivals like South by and Full Frame. But now we know that we can accept, we've accepted Hot Docs and we've accepted AFI Docs. And also we have this thing of, we have then to make it an event. It has to be like a talk back. There's a conversation, that conversation after. We also cap streaming, right? We cap it to a certain number and to a certain number of hours. It's gotta be geo-blocked because that can get in the way of our streaming deal later, which we have a streaming deal down the line. So those are things that you have to ask the festival. How many, can you cap the streaming, the views, capping the views? How long is it gonna be online? And is it going to be geo-blocked? Those are key things. And what system are they using to avoid hacking? Because that's also a big concern, right? So all those things we figured out while talking to film festivals, programmers who are also trying to figure it out. So we sort of figured it out together, which is a very interesting thing. Just a back and forth with all of them. And yes, if you have doubts, call the festival, right? Them, ask them what they're thinking, what they're doing. And if you're worried about your premiere, I would say just have conversations, have conversations with filmmakers who are also in the same position, because it is reimagining. So we're gonna have, we still will have a theatrical in the summer, whatever that looks like, right? So it may be a combination of streaming, virtual theatrical, and maybe one theater in Los Angeles if it's online. Who knows, right? But we're still hoping that we will have
Hard to know what's going to happen in a few weeks, let alone
right,
several
we're
months
still
from
planning.
now.
Yeah. But it's an interesting time, really, because you really have to reimagine, because you can't work within the box that no longer exists, really, especially this year, right? Yeah.
And that fits in very nicely, I think, to our final question that I want to put to all the panelists. And I want to note that this is actually going to be the last question. So if you haven't already had a chance to put your questions in the Q&A box, please go ahead and do that. We'll try to get to as many as we can. So the closing question for each of our panelists to respond to in a very tricky 2-minute response is really getting to this idea of how to reimagine the film industry at this moment. And some of you may be familiar with Arundhati Roy's article where she talks about the pandemic as a portal, because historically pandemics have kind of forced humans to break with the past and kind of reimagine what it is that our future might look like. And so, you know, what I want to put to you all is how COVID-19 has brought to light not only the existing asymmetries sort of in society broadly, but specifically within the filmmaking community. And so using this lens to think about filmmaking and, you know, what's the potential for potentially more democratic forms of distribution and new audiences who may not otherwise be able to come to film festivals and pay for those tickets. So what changes would each of you like to see sort of in the independent filmmaking world after COVID-19, after we even have a vaccine? And I would like to start with Yung.
Yeah. Oh boy. I mean, I've been considering this question. You know, I'm living through it, I guess. And for me, I'm partially sort of, you know, I think one adjustment is the reality of working remotely, and so I'm you know, engaging in on that process and how to technically deal with that. But on the flip side, I really can't wait until things hopefully eventually do open up, where I think we as a collective audience will have this desire, this hunger to connect in each other's space, whether it be 6 feet apart or, you know, whatever it may be. But I think I'm thinking and I'm imagining that, you know, live performance in theater and cinema that shared experience will somehow come back even stronger than in the way we left it. And that is my hope. Maybe I'm a bit of a Luddite when I think about that, that idea of, you know, that I think I'm feeling like this idea of storytelling around you know, the origins of storytelling around a fire, you know, and talking to each other. And I think that's very important. And I feel like myself sort of pushing away from having to face the digital screen and to communicate this way. You know, I want to talk to people. I don't want to necessarily, you know, shake your hand, but I want to be near you. And I'm hoping that that may be something that we'll find a new way to do that.
You don't want to shake hands? I don't blame you. All right, Poe, how about you?
You know, I'm hoping that there will be more entities and platforms that can support filmmakers from the pitch stage all the way to broadcast or, you know, the festival run. You know, at Witness, we're just one show. We do up to 30 commissions a year. So, you know, where we work editorially and fund it from 3 paragraphs all the way to broadcast. But we're just one show and there are only 3 commissioners, you know, looking after up to 30 projects. You know, my fear is that the pandemic will be over at some point. But a lot of filmmakers of color in the United States, for example, they won't be there by the time this is over. So I hope that more platforms and entities will support them, you know, and emerging ones as well. Otherwise, you're gonna lose this voice and they're not gonna come back to filmmaking. They just can't afford to. So yeah, that is my hope, but we shall see, you know. It's it's very important because grant funding and everything, it's limited. It's limited already, even pre-COVID. It's so limited. You have hundreds of people, thousands of people applying to some grants. It's just not sustainable, which cuts off a whole group of filmmakers, especially emerging ones. And if we're going to democratize the space and really have equity in our storytelling, and you know, which is supposed to reflect truth, we need to continuously fund it and support it from the beginning. But not only that, but you know, give strong editorial support. We're learning now, like I'm learning now, just how important it is to support it in ways that I never thought I had to. For example, trying to figure out PPE supply chain. I mean, we've done we do risk assessments for like kidnapping, shooting, crossfires, but this is completely different. And I can only imagine, you know, if you're an independent filmmaker, I was for a long time in the field, and it was a very lonely experience. And it's also, you put yourself in all sorts of risks. So if platforms and entities, it varies from platform and entities to, you know, capacity, but if there is room, if there's funding for that, then support ideas, because you want these docs, support it from the early stages.
Thank you, Po. So now we'll go to Seng.
Yeah, I mean, everything Po said, that's like, it's so important, you know, thinking about beyond just the project. I think that's one thing. I'm not sure, you know, this is something I have no idea how to implement, but as far as looking at things other than just project-based, you know, how do we figure out how to support, you know, like you said, further down below the line, like people who are developing, you know, not just as directors or writers, but also, you know, sound crew, like, you know, people on camera side, like we sort of need some both professional development and other, you know, support for those people. I mean, just as an example, you know, you know, there's always, I think, an emerging realization of how much emotional toll documentaries take on the filmmakers. And I remember once we're going to shoot an interview. And then I just was like, for 2 hours, you know, heard a lot of the sort of abuse that someone grew up with, which is, without being prepared for that, it can be tough. So just finding support for, you know, a greater, like expanding what we think of as filmmakers, who's needed in those spaces, and, you know, how do we support that? How do we keep people in the filmmaking world so that we can, you know, build stronger contributors all the way from, you know, on all aspects of the films. And yeah, and it's tough, especially like as an American, you know, no universal health care. I sort of wonder like I can't expect like CAAM to step up and be like, yeah, we're going to give healthcare to everybody's a member, you know, but, you know, I just wonder like with groups like ADOC or something, you know, how can we maybe find some way to have certain things like group rates for members, the way that's something like a freelancers union or some other, you know, affiliation or other professional unions do.
Thanks, Seng. Yeah, I think probably Yung may be the only one here who has the joys of universal health care over in Canada. So there is another side of it. We can potentially get there. Okay, let's go to Masashi next.
Yeah, you know, if you would have asked me a few weeks ago, or maybe even a week ago, I would have, you know, my whole mindset was get us back into the theaters. You know, for me, as someone who's been doing film festivals for almost 2 decades, I've really grown my identity and my passion for what I do around that space, that in-person space with the community, with different people coming together. And, you know, a part of me does still want that, of course. I am hoping for the day where we all can connect, and may not be shaking hands, but being just side by side or next to each other, connecting with a story on the screen together. That's so important, and something that I'm so proud that I've dedicated my life to, showcasing all these amazing works. Now that I've been doing this festival online, I have seen all these really amazing reasons why film festivals and other exhibitions organizations should continue to do stuff online. You know, last night when we did our opening night, we had audience members from all around the world kind of checking in, watching the film together, asking questions together. And to me, that added this new level of engagement and connection to a global audience that I found really inspiring. So I think moving forward for filmmakers to think of, to rethink the experience of in theater first, then online, and maybe that changes a little bit. Maybe there's ways it can go back and forth in a certain way. And then for film festivals to explore opportunities to continually engage people who may not be able to get to that theater in your own city. But there are so many people in the world who want this content. Maybe there's ways we can all think differently moving forward.
Thanks, Masashi. And Ramona.
Look, I think, when COVID is over, it's going to be over, right? They're going to find a vaccine. I think film festivals will be back. I think theater going will be back. And I'm happy about that. I like the communal experience. But what's clear to me at this time is that the structures have to change, right? Because it is so unsustainable. And although, I am loving what individual organizations are doing, like CAAM, Sundance, Tribeca, Chicken and Egg, they're all responding. But I think we're still responding in silos, right? There's still not one big response and figuring out how to move forward beyond COVID, right? How the system, and I think Poe was talking about how the system can really support all kinds of filmmakers because it is inequitable. I mean, to be an emerging filmmaker right now, I can't imagine, right? I mean, I've been doing this a long time, so I have certain people I can reach out to, gatekeepers, I can do that, but I've been doing this a very long time. Emerging, who do you reach out to, right? So I think we have to think of it in terms of restructuring, right? And having a collective response to the moment. All those institutions, both public and private, get together and figure this out right now. I don't know what that is, but we have to find out what it is. And I think right now is the time because history tells us we forget, right? When COVID is over, when there's a vaccine and people are going back to theaters and restaurants, people go back to theaters and restaurants. History will tell you that. But so now is the time, I think, to rethink, what is the response that makes things more sustainable and equitable? I do not know, but I think it's an interesting time to really figure that out.
Thanks, Ramona, and thank you for all of our panelists for these really thoughtful reflections about how we might reimagine filmmaking moving forward. So now I actually want to move right into our Q&A portion. We already have a lot of great questions, but I welcome you to keep adding some questions. And we'll actually start with one question here, and I welcome any of the panelists to jump in if they would like to respond. So the first question from Alicia, which is, which guides are you looking at for production safety and protocols? How do you think small independent productions can look at adhering to these without increasing budget tenfold?
Yeah, that's one thing I think. Using the guidelines we see handed down to us is useful, but I think, again, advocating sort of for below the line crew, one thing I'm trying to do is talk to other people who are, below the line and say, what do we need? Like, what do we need for safety? Because the danger is that it's going to be dictated by people who aren't on set, right? And I know I was reading responses to one survey, and it was somebody who works in production who was just like, kind of going off and be like, we can't always this way have production take care of this. There's a mix of like, as below the line workers, we trust the production a lot. So this is sort of a time that we need to step up, advocate for ourselves, also find those producers like Poe and, everybody on this panel who have our backs, and make sure that we, that becomes part of the protocol. So we can't, I think, always look to like say, oh, that thing that came out of Denmark and Sweden said only we're going to have 10% reduction in productivity. I'm like, that's like, you take half an hour to clean up on a 10-hour day, and that's a 5% reduction, right? So I think we just have to accept that there's going to be a decrease in productivity, and we're going to have to find, some of it will be different ways of storytelling and changing sort of sometimes how our crew structures are, maybe, both for safety and also, how we tell stories a little bit.
I know the rules are so different everywhere, and we're sort of making them up as we go along, and we're following protocols that are coming out internationally. I know my peers in China are, I was just talking to my co-producing partner in Beijing, and you're allowed to have crews. She was just on a shoot with a 5-person crew, and they were not, and they didn't need to deal with the social distancing rule. Everyone had, of course, face masks on, but we're working shoulder to shoulder. So I think it's very different from place to place, and certainly in North America, we're a little more stringent on that. And I have personally dealt with this scenario where I've had to, send out a cinematographer to film, and we set strict guidelines. One of them was that he went for a day shoot in Boston, only allowed to film B-roll, and sort of embraced this sort of social distancing aesthetic, so to speak, that sort of is becoming an idea, I guess, cinematically. And so yeah, we've even we've had a waiver and a contract signed and by him and for us and for him, where we've offered and guaranteed to cover additional health insurance, like all sorts of things to make sure things are in place that to the best of our abilities, because we're not affiliated with a major news organization. We are independent filmmakers and producers. We have to find ways, if we have the project that necessitates it. Obviously, if it was a film about a non-COVID related story, I would reconsider what would need to be done. But I think we need to, just as we do when we deal with stories in war, like I did with my shoot in Syria with This Is Not a Movie. You have to consider steps, and I know they're very different compared. COVID versus frontline war is a very different kind of battle, but in a way there's some overlap, I would say.
Thanks, Jung. We have another question from Michael Kinomoto. Are any of today's panelists running into troubles ensuring their projects in early production? If so, how are they handling this? Anyone like to speak to this?
Sorry. Yes, I should, of course. I mean, I've had to purchase insurance, and obviously there are COVID related exclusions on all the insurance packages, and so I mean, it's just kind of weird. You buy the insurance you need to cover what you used to cover. It's the same thing, but now they've built in the exclusion for coronavirus related problems, and so I think it's a problem in Canada. I know that our documentary organization here is trying to rally our government support to create their own insurance coverage for independent freelancers, which is pretty remarkable, I guess, for a country to be able to consider that. But yeah, there's got to be some sort of solution to help independent filmmakers now and moving forward. I'm not sure, but it is problematic, and I don't think there's any quick solution right now. Insurance companies just don't want to, obviously don't want to take on this responsibility.
Yeah, we're finding that it's the same thing here. We're just talking to insurance companies now, and there are a lot of exclusions. So we're like, oh wait, then what's the point? They're operating like it's still pre-pandemic, right? And we're like, well, there is that, and it's so prohibitive, right? Everything that you're paying, whatever, 10,000 for 2 months ago is now more. So yeah, we're just starting, and we're just trying to figure things out. But we're also dealing with global filmmakers, so there are different rules in different countries. So that too is something we're needing to figure out. It's very complicated.
Yeah. What's the point, I think, is a great question to say to these insurance companies. All right, so we have another question from Jennifer Abod. The question is, raising funds during this time seems wrong when money is needed for other things. Are people crowdfunding, and what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, yes, it's wrong, but there are still businesses that are looking for content, right? So a lot of people are going into development. So I've actually gotten a lot of inquiries about what I'm doing next, right? After COVID. They're all looking for after COVID films. hopefully feel good films. They don't want, you know, I'm like, really? I have two minds about that. Will really, right? Is it really all feel good films after COVID? But that's really what the inquiries I'm getting. Because, you know, the big places are looking for content there, because they will be, there'll be, you know, a lot of people who are supposed to be finishing this year won't be finished. So it's next year, everything is pushed back. And yeah, at that level, you know, that's what I know, that the people are looking for content and they're looking for feel good films. And you're like, you know, that's tough.
Yeah, we have another question related to that. Let's see. From James Shee, I wonder if people might be oversatiated with COVID experience post-pandemic. Will they watch COVID content? Similar to how school shooting content was popular for a while, but some producers turned down such stories in favor of more escapism. So any other thoughts on this question?
Well, I think Ramona touched upon it in earlier, but I think you know, I've had this debate with my partner because I wasn't so sure about jumping into a pandemic story, but she reasoned this with me. She told me that you know, this is the only kind of remarkable situation where everyone in the world is experiencing the same situation, and we all need to find a way to kind of see it through different perspectives. It's such a universal thing right now, obviously on different degrees, at different levels, and different dichotomies. But I think there is that necessity to and a need to kind of interpret it and to think it through currently and probably a long time afterwards. So I feel like there is going to be this an inertia to want to hear these stories. Obviously told through unique different ways, but I don't think it's I don't think it's similar to everyone's making a story about about refugees or something like that. I don't think it's like that, you know, saying that that's what we're hearing from broadcasters and such.
No, I agree. I mean, one quick really funny story. We were talking to you know, one of the gatekeepers, and she goes, before you say anything, if this is one more Zoom call film, we're over. Like, no Zoom calls in your film. It's just funny. We're like, no, we don't have a Zoom call in the film. We're good. Which is just funny. I just wanted to share that. So they're not looking for Zoom call films. That's all.
No, never Zoom call films. And for us, like, we do only observational documentaries. So it's like, you know, it's more challenging. But what I always tell filmmakers, not just, I mean, you can think of it in the COVID context, but everything as well that's happening in the news, that's breaking. Look at it, step back and look larger themes that will continue to be there. So what will COVID exacerbate? Race, class, divisions, surveillance, what is it? And those things are gonna hold true, unfortunately, long after the pandemic is over. If anything, it would make it worse. So if you think of stories moving forward and these larger themes, and then, you know, look for charismatic characters and potential journeys that will last. But if you just look specifically at the moment, and it's a slice of life or a profile of a character at this moment, that won't last. That's going to be harder to have longevity.
Thank you, Po. All right, we have another question from Tony O. The question is, what is your perspective on requiring your cast and crew to get tested for COVID-19 before booking and or shooting? What are the legalities behind this requirement? That's a tough one.
I would say the tough part for me as a crew person, I'm trying to get tested. I got tested actually last week. So Oakland, for anybody who's in Oakland who doesn't know already, is basically allowing testing for anybody regardless of insurance, documentation, or any sort of symptoms. So I would encourage people to do that. The tough part, just almost from a technical standpoint, is you may not have the you know, the signs, I can't remember the medical terms for it, but like, you know, you may not test positive even when you have it if you contracted it sort of recently. I know on bigger shows, you know, they're going to have like a friend who's a director, they're going to basically have to quarantine for like 2 weeks before every show, you know, and get tested. And that's obviously very difficult for day players, people on smaller projects. You know, like last summer I shot a film that was part of a series that we, you know, it was a bunch of short films, producers got together and sort of booked a week with people. But nobody's going to quarantine for 2 weeks for like a no budget film that takes 1 week, you know, like also that goes to the sort of the cost is like, I'm not sure. I mean, that's something that producers can talk about more is also like, how are we going to figure out those costs to sort of, you know, for the testing even to make sense, you know, for the technical side of being detectable, you know, how many days do we need for that? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I was going to say beyond the legality, it's not sustainable. You can't afford it. Small productions can't afford to test, you know, every time, and then quarantine. It's just not. I can't imagine how a documentary budget, especially, right, can sustain that. So beyond legalities, how can you even afford it? I don't think it's reasonable. But then, what do you do, right? Of course.
Okay, so we have a question from Barath. We all know COVID is not going to end soon. How should we prepare to our future in filmmaking? Because streaming online will not always profit us. So does anyone have advice for Barath and other filmmakers on how to prepare for a future in filmmaking?
That's the thing though. How do you prepare? I don't think you can. We can't look back to the past and say, oh, this happened, and based on that, my life experience then or other people's life experience, that's how we're going to prepare forward. There's nothing to base it off of. Yeah, it would be, I don't know, unless the other everybody else on this panel, maybe you might have some thoughts, but I just don't, I don't know. I don't think there are. Wait, I mean, how does one prepare? I don't know.
Yeah, my thought on that is for me, like we have to diversify our skills is one thing. I mean, that's just sort of a survival thing. It's not just going to be how do we prepare in sort of the festival system or the distribution system, but also just like how do we prepare as people, right? We're gonna, you know, I've been fortunate because I do post-production stuff. I've picked up some work there, but like, you know, we're gonna have to rethink so many things, right? Some of this stuff is like sort of since the internet age, you know, the good and the bad. Some of the good things is that distribution has changed a lot. So I think smaller, you know, like YouTube, obviously smaller content, individual producers can make things that you can sustain as some sort of career. I mean, so ignoring the people who are like millionaires and like all these influencers, there is a certain level of like, okay, we have to, you know, also personally reassess like what do we need for our careers, and unfortunately we're gonna have to scale that back too, sort of on a global level. That's like a much bigger question of like what resources we can stuff. I think my answer is so we have to diversify our skills, be able to
Seng,
do a lot of different
we're having
things.
trouble hearing you. There's some kind of audio interference. So
Anyway, diversify. That was my basic point.
pick up extra skills. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Seng. Okay, so we're gonna actually go with one last question from Ashley Duong. Personally, how do you stay motivated these days? I find that's hard sometimes. When some of these problems seem so large, systemic, and hard to grapple with. COVID-19 crisis might end in a foreseeable future, but there is still climate change around the corner. It feels like a moment where there needs to be larger changes in how we structure society. I wonder how you see the role of filmmakers and artists in times of longer term crisis.
Hi, this is a great question. And Ashley, hi, how are you? We worked together on a film that I made called Fruit Hunters. Oh man, that's a tough. So I think, you know, I certainly am going through these ups and downs, thinking about what our role is as filmmakers and storytellers. In a way, I joke that, you know, if it was the apocalypse, which it kind of is in a way, is it not? We're very low on on the survival rung. I think doctors are are more in need, and those sort of essential workers. But anyway, but then, upon reflection, uh, I think we should feel emboldened that our abilities to tell emotional stories, to reach a level of engagement and a level of humanity in the way we tell our stories is so crucial right now, whether it be on the bigger, beyond COVID issues and problems that we have today. And I think, if anything, that sense of that little ego push, I think, for us filmmakers is crucial right now, and we need to continue to hone our craft that way. And I think being in lockdown doesn't mean we don't stop creating. I think it means we take whatever we have, whether it be a cell phone, or maybe not. Maybe it's not even a cell phone. Maybe it's something more performative. Maybe it's in the immediate, and we find ways to tell activist stories, and stories with heart and emotion, and with a political sort of commentary that's so crucial right now. So I know you'll figure something out there, Ashley. I know you've got a lot going on there. So yeah.
Thank you,
Great question.
So we're actually out of time, but that was a great question to end on. So thank you, Ashley, for that really thoughtful question, and to Yung for that inspiring answer. I want to thank all of the panelists for their time today and for engaging in this important conversation, and to everyone for the really thoughtful questions that you brought to the table. This is not the end of the conversation. We're actually the first webinar panel as a part of this 2-day Filmmaker Summit that CAAM usually has in person, but actually, because we're online, I think is accessible to a lot more people. And so I'd invite you to check out the schedule of other panels that are happening today and tomorrow. There's also some fantastic films that will be available, and you can get free tickets for those online. And please join us for the virtual happy hour we'll be having tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific and 6 p.m. Eastern. So thank you again so much for joining us. Thank you to all the panelists especially.